October 27th, 1962. Somewhere in the Caribbean Sea, 90 feet underwater, the Soviet submarine B-59 had been submerged for days. Its batteries were nearly dead. The temperature inside the hull had climbed to over 50 degrees Celsius. The crew was exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified. Depth charges from American destroyers were exploding around them. The Americans were trying to force them to surface, not knowing that the submarine carried a nuclear torpedo with roughly the same destructive yield as the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, believed war had already started. He believed the explosions outside meant the United States had begun its attack on the Soviet Union. He gave the order to arm the nuclear torpedo. He wanted to fire. Under Soviet naval protocol, he needed the agreement of 2 other officers. The political officer agreed. The 3rd officer, Flotilla Commander Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He argued they could not be certain war had started. He insisted they surface and seek instructions from Moscow. Arkhipov prevailed. The B-59 surfaced. No torpedo was fired. The next day, Khrushchev and Kennedy reached their agreement. The Soviet missiles were removed from Cuba. The crisis was over. But we did not know until decades later, when the classified records were finally opened, exactly how close it actually came. What the United States government did not know during those 13 days, what even the CIA did not discover until decades later through retrospective analysis of declassified Soviet documents, was that the Soviet Union had quietly deployed 98 tactical nuclear warheads to Cuba. Not just the medium-range ballistic missiles that American spy planes photographed from the air. 98 additional weapons that American intelligence never detected. 12 Luna tactical missiles with 2 kiloton warheads. 80 cruise missiles with 12 kiloton warheads, each one roughly the size of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. One of those cruise missiles was deployed just 15 miles from the American naval base at Guantanamo Bay, armed and ready. The American military's plan in the event of an invasion of Cuba estimated 18,500 American casualties in the first 10 days of fighting. That estimate was based on the assumption that the Soviets had 10,000 to 12,000 troops on the island with no tactical nuclear weapons. In reality, the Soviets had 40,000 troops and 92 functional tactical nuclear warheads, with authority to use them against an American invasion without waiting for orders from Moscow. An American invasion of Cuba, which several members of Kennedy's own military command were urging, would not have produced 18,500 casualties. It would have produced an American invasion force of 180,000 men, walking into a nuclear ambush. And that ambush would have been the end of the world as it existed in 1962. Here is how historian Martin J. Sherwin, writing for the National Archives, described the Cuban Missile War in a hypothetical account. The estimated number of North American deaths was upwards of 200 million. Double, perhaps even quadruple, that number of Soviet, Eastern European, and Chinese citizens perished. And no one had reliable data on how many Western Europeans, Africans, Asians, and Australians were killed by the radioactive fallout as it enveloped the globe. Cuba instantly became a wasteland. There were few structures left standing in Moscow or Washington. That is what nuclear war in 1962 actually looked like on paper. Not a limited exchange, not a surgical strike with contained damage. Total civilizational destruction. The American nuclear arsenal in October 1962 included 1,576 strategic air command bombers, carrying 2,962 nuclear bombs, 183 Atlas and Titan intercontinental ballistic missiles, 144 Polaris missiles aboard 9 nuclear submarines, and 10 newly deployed Minuteman ICBMs, a total nuclear force capable of delivering hundreds of megatons of destruction to targets across the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. All of it would have launched within minutes of receiving the news that nuclear weapons had been used against American forces in Cuba. The Strategic Air Command was already at DEFCON 2, the highest state of alert, short of actual war, the only time in American history it has ever reached that level. Bombers were already airborne, on rotating patrol, ready to receive launch orders. The Soviet response would have been everything they had. According to declassified assessments, Soviet bombers could deliver approximately 270 nuclear weapons to American territory. Their medium-range missiles in Cuba, if operational, could have reached Washington in roughly 13 minutes. The Soviet strategic arsenal, while smaller than America's, was more than sufficient to ensure that no major city in the United States survived. Now consider what does not exist in the world that follows this exchange. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 happened at the exact moment that the generation coming of age in the world's wealthiest country was beginning to express something genuinely new. A cultural revolution built on optimism, on the belief that the future was going to be better than the past, on music and art and politics that challenged every assumption the generation before them had lived by. The Beatles released their first single in 1962. Bob Dylan released his first album that same year. The civil rights movement was approaching the March on Washington. The space program was accelerating toward the moon. The personal computer, the internet, the entire technological revolution of the late 20th century, all of it was being dreamed into existence by people who were alive in October 1962 and who would spend the next 60 years building it. Every single one of those people dies in a nuclear exchange in October 1962. Not slowly, from disease or age, but instantly or in the agonizing weeks that follow radiation exposure. The survivors and their would-be survivors, in shelters, in remote areas, in the southern hemisphere, where the initial strikes did not reach inherit a world without functioning governments, without power grids, without supply chains, without the agricultural systems that feed billions of people. Nuclear winter, the atmospheric darkening caused by the soot and ash of burning cities, blocking sunlight, would collapse global agriculture for years. The famines that follow the bombs may kill as many people as the bombs themselves. The world that emerges from a nuclear exchange in 1962, if it emerges at all, that it does not reach the moon in 1969. It does not build the internet. It does not develop the medicines that have saved billions of lives since that October. It rebuilds slowly, painfully, over generations from a level of devastation that human civilization has never experienced and may not survive intact. And yet the world did not end in October 1962. It did not end because of a series of individual decisions made by individual human beings in conditions of extreme stress, incomplete information, and genuine terror. Kennedy resisted his generals when they pushed for an invasion. Khrushchev, who knew the American nuclear advantage was overwhelming, looked for a way out rather than a way forward. And Vasily Arkhipov, on a submarine in the Caribbean with the temperature at 50 degrees and depth charges exploding around him, decided that the appropriate response to uncertainty was restraint rather than retaliation. The Castro letter, perhaps the most chilling document to emerge from the declassified records of the crisis, was sent by Fidel Castro to Khrushchev on October 26th, as the crisis reached its peak. Castro urged Khrushchev to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against the United States if the Americans invaded Cuba. He was asking in plain language for the end of the world. Khrushchev later wrote that he was horrified by the letter. Even in the middle of the most dangerous confrontation in human history, the Soviet leader understood something that Castro apparently did not. There was no version of nuclear war that anyone won. The Cuban Missile Crisis did not end because the systems worked. It ended because enough individual people made the right calls at the right moments, and because the margin for error was so thin that getting lucky once was all that stood between the world we live in and the world that might have burned. There were at least 4 separate moments during those 13 days when a different decision by a single person would have started a nuclear war. 4 moments. Any one of them going the other way, and this sentence would never have been written, because the person writing it would never have been born. The world did not end in October 1962, but it came close enough that we should never stop asking what that means, and what it means that we are still leaving the fate of civilization in the hands of individuals under pressure, with incomplete information, in submarines and bunkers, waiting for orders or deciding not to wait. How many times do you think humanity has come this close to the end? And how many times can we keep getting lucky? Drop your answer below.